program is pre-recorded.
This evening, Africa Today honors the life and work of Dr. Runoko Rashidi, who made his transition on August 2nd, 2021. Ashe. This interview with Dr. Rashidi was done in 2010. Runoko Rashidi, Dr. Runoko Rashidi is a historian, research specialist, writer, world traveler, and a public lecturer focusing on the African presence globally and the African foundations of world civilization. Dr. Rashidi is the author of Introduction to the Study of African Classical Civilizations, that was published by Carnac House in London in 1993. He's the editor, along with the late esteemed Dr. Ivan Van Sertima of Rutgers University, of the African Presence in Asia, considered to be one of the more comprehensive volumes on the topic. He is worked on a major pamphlet completed titled The Global African Community, the African Presence in Asia, Australia, and the South Pacific. In 2005, December, they released his work in French, 1,000-Year History of the African Presence in Asia. Runoko writes all the time. You see his essays in the Journal of African Civilization. He's written on ancient and modern Britons, the African Presence in prehistoric America, tribute to Chancellor Williams. We'll talk a little bit about his recent delegations, his visits to Kemet, his visit to Spain and Morocco. He has devoted his entire life to the study and work and research about African peoples. You can go to a Google and do Global Presence Africa. It'll pop up, and he runs a number of delegations a year to different parts of the world. And if you're interested in going with him, he was here on KPFA. Dr. Rashidi was to talk with us last year when Greg Bridges and myself spoke about a tribute to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, and the previous year when we were talking about Asa Hilliard. He's been here in the San Francisco Bay Area through Marcus Books, through Wose Communities, a friend and a scholar. Runoko, how are you doing?
I'm just fine, Brother Walter. How are you?
Good. Runoko, do you ever stay in the same place for more than 2 weeks?
It's rare. It's rare. Better way to put it, I do not think I have completely unpacked the suitcase in this decade, in this millennia. I think the last time I unpacked a bag was probably about 1997. I've been able to visit, in the last 12 years, 99 countries, lectured in 53 or 54, and I don't see any reason to stop now.
You know, Runoko, this has been a long journey, and as I read your blog and your notes, I know sometimes it's easier than not, and you continue to walk forward. Where did this journey start for you in terms of the attention, the devotion that you're giving to African people globally?
Really a long time ago. I just had my 56th birthday, and I remember as an 18-year-old university freshman in Southern California, along with many people, reading this classic work, Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And I think that really put far horizons in my imagination. Here's a man who not only attempted to address the very important question of what happened to us, how did we fall from the pyramids to the projects, and then how we can get it back. But beyond that, for me, it's like he spoke to me directly. He pointed out that Africans had left Africa in ancient times, before shackles and chains and colonization and invasion. And I think even at that point, I wanted to find out where those Africans went. You know, what happened to them? What became of them? And what is their consciousness of Africa today? So I've really traveled around the world more than any living scholar or historian that I'm aware of. But I've also been blessed to travel extensively in Africa. I just got back from Nigeria. I think that makes country number 28 in Africa I've gone to. But the idea of going to these places, seeing artifacts that I've only seen in books, in these various museums, or seeing pieces that, as far as I know, have not been documented anywhere by anybody, making contacts with diverse black communities in different parts of the world, it's so exciting. I mean, I just love it, and I feel like I have been given a sacred mission. to help connect the global African community, and it's a mission. It's something I don't intend to flunk.
Well, Runoko, at one point, as I was reading on your webpage, you were working, I think, at Compton Community College. You'd been doing another job before that. You met Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. You met Dr. Charles French, and you took off. What was it about those early meetings and about where Runoko had come from that kind of put that spark that not only is this the direction I want to go, but I want to go this direction full speed ahead?
Well, I think it just suits my personality, Walter. I'm a full speed ahead person, very intense, very determined, very absorbed. You mentioned Ivan. I worked with Ivan for, I think, 27 years. We started working together when I worked at Compton in the early 1980s. And he, again, was like Chancellor Williams, a kind of a role model, somebody that I wanted to be like, somebody that I didn't want to duplicate, but I wanted to be like. I wanted to make a contribution in the world similar to what he did in respect to the African presence in early America. So it seemed to be very natural. It's almost like I was able to find my mission in life fairly early, and I pursued it relentlessly because that's the only way I know how to pursue it.
There was an interesting discussion which was on your listserv, and this was after you had come back from Nigeria, which we'll get to talk about. And you were putting together this panel, which we spoke about off mic, that was going to be in Dakar, Senegal, and you were talking about who's the successor to Ivan Van Sertima. And at some point you said, I don't know if Ivan would like this particular discussion. People have weighed in on it. Talk about that, because it embodies some of this notion that you've looked at as so many of the people that you work with have made a transition.
Well, you could say, and in a way I'm kind of glad that we aren't talking about an illustrious African who's just made his transition. Listening to your introduction, which was very kind, by the way, you mentioned that we had done the interview about Asa a couple of years ago and Ivan last year. I'm kind of glad that we aren't talking about that in a sense today. But in a way, I think the careers of Ivan and Asa and so many others, particularly in the late 1980s and early 1990s, kind of marked the heyday of this phase of what might be called African-centric historiography. Ivan with me, we were working on 1-2 books a year sometimes, talking all the time. You had the big conference in Aswan that ASCAC sponsors, 1,000 people there. The books were readily available. It was big. People were talking about Carter G. Woodson's Miseducation of the Negro and Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James and Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And I think that expectations were raised so high that it's a little disappointing as I look around today that I don't see that same kind of movement and I don't see that same kind of scholarship. Now, the reason I was raising the question about who might be the great Ivan Van Sertima's successor, I was specifically focusing on the African presence in early America. Now, Ivan was an expert, more than anybody who ever lived, on the issue of Africans among the Olmec. And the Olmec, as many of us know, is the first great civilization of the Americas. And it's consistent with this, I guess you could say, crusade that I'm embarked on now, along with others, to show that our history doesn't begin with slavery, even in the Americas. So Ivan did magnificent work on the Olmec. He didn't say the Olmec were African. He said there was a prominent African element among the Olmec. Now, since Ivan became ill and his transition, I found a lot of similar images among the Maya. The Maya is, some people would say, was simultaneous to the Olmec, but certainly it dominated Mesoamerica after the Olmec, beginning, I think, about 500 A.D. And so it seems to me that the Maya are very, very, very important in terms of our discussion on the African presence in America, early America. And I've been able to find in Belize, in Guatemala, in Mexico in particular, a number of black images of important Maya officials, maybe deities. And it occurred to me that we really need somebody or somebodies to do the same kind of work that Ivan did about the Olmec among the Maya. And I looked around, and I couldn't really find anybody like that. And it just occurred to me that we don't have a successor to Ivan in that field. I don't know. Some of the discussion was whether we wanted a successor. Another part of it was Ivan so significant in terms of his work that nobody could really follow him. And I found that whole discussion to be, and the fact that I don't see anybody of that stature, to be very, very disappointing. We have people who followed in Sheikh Anta Diop's footsteps in terms of the Nile Valley. But in terms of looking at the African presence outside of the Nile Valley, outside of Africa itself, I see the people really doing that kind of work as being very scarce. Now, it could be, too, that it's simply because we don't have a publication like the Journal of African Civilizations that brought all of these various scholars together. But either way, I found the conclusions that we came to disappointing, and I would tend to think that Ivan would be disappointed as well, because nobody has really taken up the mantle on that same level in other areas.
Well, you mentioned the point about publishing, and Ivan was clearly the leader in that. I don't know how well, you know that better than most of us, how well that was able to, whatever revenues came from publishing, were able to sustain Ivan. But a thought, perhaps, Runoko, is that maybe scholarship is taking a different avenue, because when you go to your website or when you go to a discussion that you open 10, 15 years ago, the level of interchange wouldn't have been what it is today. We still don't have someone who, as you say, covers the areas of Central America. But your thoughts on what you and Ivan and Menu and Pim and Chancellor Williams have birthed in terms of the African global community?
Well, one thing I think has changed fundamentally. First, maybe the audience has changed. I don't know about that. But one thing I'm certain about is the avenue of distributing the information has changed with the Internet. With the Internet, I fear that there will come a time when books are actually obsolete, when libraries and bookstores are non-existent. My grandchildren may ask me one day, Grandpa, when you were a little boy, they had libraries, right? I heard about bookstores. What was a bookstore? Where can you find a book? That's what I fear the world is coming to, because everything seems to be digitized. I'm always looking at a monitor. I'm looking at one right now. I spend so much time on Facebook that I think of myself as the pharaoh of Facebook. Okay. So that's one thing that's changed dramatically. And while you mention his name, I have to give props to Brother Manu Ampem. I think he's one of our greatest scholars. I think that he does not get a lot of the recognition that he deserves. And one of the things I admire about him is that something he's talked about for a very long time, and that is primary research. But to me, I just don't see anybody like an Ivan around, people who had dedicated their entire lives to one particular thing outside of Africa itself. Egypt is fairly easy. The Nile Valley is fairly easy. There's lots of documentation for that. But there are other fields that really, really need to be fleshed out. For example, you hear so many people now talking about Africans in America, not just before Columbus, but Africans who were the first people of the Americas, or African-descended people. But nobody's done any serious research on that. Nobody's really fleshed that out. So, Ivan's absence was a great loss. And again, I just don't see anybody, doing anything on the level that he was doing. Maybe I'm biased because I worked with Ivan so closely.
But before we talk a bit about some of your recent travels and delegations, and particularly your visit to Nigeria, when we spoke with you before, you were talking about both Jan Carew and Dr. Ben. And I'm wondering, I know that both of them have been walking through a number of health and strength-related issues. Is there an update, Runoko?
Well, I would say there are three people of that stature and that age group that I would want to mention. First, obviously, Dr. Ben. I think Dr. Ben is 92 now. I visited with him in the beginning of February, the end of January this year. I've kept in touch. He's back in his apartment in Harlem. right around the corner from the Schoenberg Library. Obviously, his health is not very, very good, but it does seem like he has people looking after him. And, again, I spent time with him. I was very pleased. And I do keep up with Dr. Ben. He's alive. Unfortunately, his wife of about 45 years, Sister Gertrude Benyakinen, passed away about a month ago, and I know he took that very, very hard. Jan Carew, among other things, could be said to have been the mentor of Ivan Van Sertima, or certainly one of Ivan's chief mentors. I saw Jan around the same time. In fact, I think I saw Jan the last week of January 2010. We had dinner together. We both spoke at a big program in honor of Ivan at the University of Louisville. It went well. Jan, I think, is 89 now. He suffers from Parkinson's disease. His health is not very good, but he was still lucid. We talked. We shared a lot of memories about Ivan. And the other person I wanted to mention is Dr. Edward Robinson, a longtime historian and scholar in Philadelphia, one of the contributing authors to another kind of book called Journey of the Songhai People. Dr. Robinson is 91 or 92. In fact, Dr. Ben and Dr. Robinson had never met before, so I was able to broker, I guess you could say, a historic meeting between them in Harlem and Dr. Ben's apartment at the end of January. And so those are the big three as far as stature and age is concerned, and I fear that they won't be around a lot longer.
Now, you have an event which you were talking about to some degree that spurred part of the conversation on your site, which is about an upcoming event in West Africa where you're working on putting together on a panel. Share that with the listeners, Runoko.
Well, yeah, I will share it. It's an upcoming conference in Dakar, Senegal. It's going to occupy most of December 2010. It's called FESMAN, F-E-S-M-A-N. I suppose somebody could Google that or take that to a search engine. It's going to be a culture and arts festival, and inside that is going to be a historic conference. And I think there are going to be 5 or 6 panels. One deals with the Nile Valley. Another deals, I'm happy to say, with resistance. Another deals with blacks in governance, or Africans in governance. It seems to me that there's another one on blacks in science and technology, a book subject that Ivan also worked on. And I think there's one more, but the one that I'm the president of is on the African diaspora. And what is exciting about that to me is that we're not going to begin our view of the African diaspora, and I even have second thoughts about using that particular term, but we're using it in this context, the spread of African people outside of Africa.
Okay.
We're going to deal with the ancient diaspora. We're going to have representatives, Aboriginal Australians, black people from Melanesia. We have at least one brother from India. And then we'll also be talking about Africans in early Europe, people like Alexander Dumas, men of African descent, Alexander Dumas, Alexander Pushkin. And, of course, we're going to look at the African presence in the Americas from the time of Lucia. The skull was found in Brazil some years ago. BBC did a reconstruction of it. It was clearly a black person. Lucia is perhaps the first known person of the Americas. So we'll trace that portion of the Americas from the most prehistoric phases until the advent of the slave trade. And of course, there'll be another panel that deals with Africans in parts of the Middle East, another one that deals with Africans in the Americas beginning with the 15th century. So that will be historic. I'm very excited. I'm hoping for the best. The Senegalese government seems to be very excited about it, and I'm honored that I've been asked to play a major part in the planning of that.
Yeah, this is actually the third Black World Conference. It's only been held previously in Nigeria, I believe in 1975, and then later it was held in Dakar, and this is the third one. That's coming up in December of this year. It is correctly titled the FESMAN, F-E-S-M-A-N, often referred to as the Black World Festival. You were at a historic event, and I was so excited when I saw it on the site there, and you were at the Global Black Nationalities Conference, and that was recently in Nigeria. Talk to us about what that was about, Runoko.
Well, I spoke at 2 conferences, but I suppose that the Global Black Nationalities Conference was the biggest in many ways. I'd never been to Nigeria before. And within a period of a few months, I've received 3 invitations to do plenary presentations or keynote addresses at 3 historic conferences in Nigeria. Quite remarkable. Of course, this is the 50th anniversary of Nigerian independence. Now, the Global Black Nationalities Conference, this was the first one ever held. It was held in Oshogbo in Osun State, and it was big. In fact, I couldn't believe how big it was. I had just arrived in Lagos the night before. Early in the mornings, the next morning, somebody drove me to Oshogbo in Osun State. I was thinking I would have hoped that I'd had time to go to my hotel and put on my nicest African suit, go to the conference and relax. These Africans were on time. The conference was supposed to start at 10. I got there at 5 minutes to 10, pulled out a nice African shirt in my bag, and strolled in there. 2,000 people showed up. Okay. Dignitaries from all over Nigeria. I sat next to the deputy governor of Osun State, and right next to her was former President Obasanjo, who gave a big address. I mean, I shook hands with the man. And next to me was the most important of the paramount kings of Osun State. We were just sitting there chatting all day long. So I'm in the midst of royalty. King Sunny Ade performed right in front of me. All these diplomats, all these ambassadors, and they were talking strong talk about the importance of black people claiming their destiny, looking at the importance of history, that black people would rule the world again, according to these folk, in Nigeria. And I was the first keynote speaker. So it was really historic. It was a great honor. I must confess I was very nervous. My mouth got dry.
Okay.
But there were television cameras everywhere, and it was broadcast live on Nigerian TV and radio. So it was really, really, really big. And I felt honored as a child of Africa, you know, somebody whose ancestors went out of the door of no return, to be able to feel like I did return, that we returned, and we returned in grand style to plot and plan the renaissance of African people. So, Walter, it was one of the greatest honors of my life, and it's something I'll never forget.
And what did you speak on? You gave a couple of presentations there, Runoko.
Well, I had planned to give a presentation, a visual presentation, just showing the range of African people, black people in Vietnam, black people in ancient China, images of black people among the Maya and Olmec that we talked about, black people in India. And I did put in a flash drive in a computer, and it was put on a huge screen while I was talking. But in essence, I talked about the importance of our expanding our vision of Pan-Africanism, where black people were. I talked about the legacy of Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X. I expressed my great pleasure at being back in Africa and how we needed to embrace one another. I mentioned that Africans in the diaspora desperately need Africa, and Africa needs us. I mentioned the negative image of Africa and how we must begin to slowly, meticulously, painstakingly change that image. I told them that what you do for yourself depends on what you think of yourself, and what you think of yourself depends on what you know of yourself, and what you know of yourself depends on what you have been told. And I must confess, it resonated quite well.
Fantastic. Now, you were also there for the festival in Oshogbo. The festival, I believe that festival goes back thousands of years. And this is in the sacred forest of Yoruba divination and Ifa. Is that correct or no?
Yes, it is, my brother. And I've never had an experience like that before.
Talk to us.
Well, right after that, I spoke at the Global Black Nationalities Conference. I spoke at another conference. This conference was called Slavery, Slave Trade, and Its Consequences. And this was the conference for most of the scholars. Global Black Nationalities took on strong political and cultural overtones. But I went to another city in Osun State, and I did that, and my presentation there was called What Slavery Made Us Forget, that it made us forget we had a history before slavery. One of the highlights was meeting a sister from Turkey, And another highlight was meeting a sister from the United Arab Emirates. When the conference was over, those of us who were interested, which was just about everybody, went to the Ashogbo Festival. Walter, incredibly intense. Tens of thousands of people in the sacred grove by a sacred river. I don't know how to describe it. It left me with one word in particular, and that pretty much describes, I'll use it to describe the entire Nigerian experience, but that day in particular, intensity. People packed together, the sense of adoration and respect, very, very profound. It was a sacred day, and I was honored to be there.
You're so transparent on your website, Runoko. I mean, when you have days where you're emotional, you write about being emotional. When you have days where you're questioning, you write about that. When you have days of anger, you write about that. And when I read your notes about being in the sacred forest, I mean, I think you were using the words that you were in tears.
I was in tears. I was overwhelmed. Sometimes, for me, just being in Africa itself is overwhelming. When you think of our journey, being taken from Africa and what we have endured, and then coming back and standing on African soil, particularly a sacred place, it can be very overwhelming. And that day, I think that the tears just flowed. I wasn't embarrassed. I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't too proud. I cried like a baby. And to me, just going back to Africa, being in Africa, is very therapeutic. Let me just tell you this quickly.
Take your time.
And I hope this doesn't take too much time, but this is important for me. I started traveling to Africa, I think, about 1991, 1992. I went to Egypt several times with Dr. Ben. And then around 2000 or so, I think it was 2000, I was invited to so-called sub-Saharan Africa. I was invited to Namibia for Africa Day to do a series of speeches around the founding of the Organization of African Unity, 1963 in May. And I decided since I was going to, was important because I began to think even then, well, if I'm going to Namibia, which used to be called Southwest Africa, colonized by the Germans, I might as well see as much of the region as I can. So I also went to Zambia, but I also did a series of lectures in Zimbabwe. Now, Namibia was big. I was on television a lot. People would see me and stop me on the streets. I lectured, I think, in 5 of the 7 states of Namibia. The governor of each state will come out to meet me. It was big. Sometimes I lectured in front of thousands of people. I did presentations in front of thousands of people. And for whatever reason, in the middle of each presentation, it never failed, and Zimbabwe was the same way, I would start to tell about these dreams that I had, these nightmares that I had never really told anybody about. And I would get really emotional, so choked up I could barely continue. And the dreams were twofold. One was that I was somewhere in my neighborhood. I know I live around here somewhere, but I couldn't find my house. I'd go down this street, go around the corner, this avenue, this block, this boulevard, but I could never find my home. And it was very unsettling. And the other dream was I would come to visit my family in Los Angeles where I grew up, and they wouldn't want me to be with them. They had a nice house, with comfortable beds, but they'd make me sleep on the floor. They wouldn't eat with me. They would laugh at me. And I would be very angry. Sometimes call my family and wake them up early in the morning and tell them what happened. They say, boy, you must be crazy, because we love each other so much. And I realized at that point that those dreams had a much greater significance, for me at least, and that because we were taken from our homes so long ago, there's a sense that I had, and I suspect many of us have, of homelessness. And because we were separated from our families, there's a sense deeply rooted inside of us that there's a sense of rejection and alienation or fear of it. And I realized at that point that those dreams became crystal clear to me. And it spoke of the trauma that we had suffered. And the audience would get emotional when I would explain what happened. And they said, but Runoko, we are your family, and this is your home. Walter, I never had those dreams anymore after that. It was as though I had an exorcism, that the demons, in a sense, have been taken out of me. And I think that many of us who have gone through this middle passage, through enslavement, Jim Crow, peonage, black codes, etc., we suffer from that psychological damage so bad that a lot of us don't even realize that the hurt and the pain and the anger is still there. But going back to Africa allowed me to channel that. It made me a better person. It made me more whole again. And sometimes, like the experience at the Oshun Festival in Nigeria, it all comes back again. And so I would beg every African in the diaspora who can do it, go home. Go visit Africa. Stand on African soil, see it and touch it and smell it. Don't believe everything the media says. When I was in Nigeria, nobody kidnapped me. Nobody demanded money from me. I didn't have to pay any bribe. I felt at home. People were respectful to me. I was wonderful, Walter, and I just can't emphasize the importance enough of going, of sharing, of being involved. And these Facebook messages, these internet messages allow me to do that, to communicate my feelings and emotions with few reservations to a lot of sisters and brothers who are feeling the same thing but aren't necessarily able to have the physical experience themselves.
We're speaking with Runoko Rashidi, historian, researcher, writer, world traveler. I think he was talking about having traveled to over 100 countries over the last 15 to 20 years, 28 countries out of the 53 on the African continent. You see his writing extensively, particularly with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. He has a book which was recently translated into the French, which has increased the access for people in French-speaking countries. He's written as broadly as The African Presence in Prehistoric America to the Moors in Antiquity, which we want to talk a bit about today. Tribute to Dr. Chancellor Williams. Runoko, when you're talking in Nigeria or Morocco or Philadelphia or particularly outside of the United States, how do you explain to people, how do you tell people in Nigeria or tell people in Senegal where we're at? I make that point because you were talking earlier about Marcus Garvey, who comes to the United States and says, where are your cities, where are your institutions, where are your libraries? How do you explain? What's the process of explaining to people that you encounter where we are at as African people in the United States?
Walter, I'm not sure if I'm following specifically your line of questioning there.
I'm saying that when you engage with people, and you were talking earlier about the issues of pain and the legacy of homelessness, how do you translate this to people when you're talking in Nigeria? How do you explain to them if somebody says, well, where are African Americans at today? What are the struggles? What are the challenges? What are the weaknesses? What are the strengths?
Well, now I'm dealing with two groups of people to a large extent. On the one hand, you're dealing with the scholars and the intellectuals who have some degree of understanding. Some of the Nigerian scholars that I met, for example, have been in the United States frequently. They know our struggle. And then I'm dealing with ordinary people.
Right. That's what I'm talking about.
Who are so, this is my observation, who in so many ways are simply so caught up in trying to survive from day to day that the idea of sitting down, contemplating about sisters and brothers in the United States and what our plight is very far removed from their reality.
Got you.
I mean, I think that in some ways, what some of us have done, with the best of intentions, have created in the minds of many in the United States a kind of a utopia, an African paradise. And that was what I thought. And then, as I mentioned, I started visiting other parts of Africa outside of Egypt, outside of the five-star hotels and the pyramids, and I saw a very different reality. And I think that the average African is just trying to struggle to make it from day to day, to feed their families, to send their children to a good school, to have electricity. One of the things I think that we have, and when I say we, I'm talking about Africans in the United States, African Americans in abundance more than any other group of Africans, is that we have the luxury of time to sit and even have this conversation about the future, about the past, about the present. We have radio, we have TV, we have internet, we have all of these things, most of us, in spite of racism that's still obvious in America, we're not missing many meals. Most of us have full bellies. We've got cars, and we've got money for public transportation. We have the time to attend a lecture. We can go to Marcus bookstore and buy a book and have conversation. I would argue that the average African on the continent is just trying to make it, that they don't have the luxury to contemplate, well, what is our relationship with our sisters and brothers in the United States? I wonder what life is like in other parts. I think that's a real luxury. And I think that that's something that we really, really take for granted. And it's not just Africans, I think, in Africa, but I think it's Africans in South America and other parts of the world that have been underdeveloped, that we are the ones in the United States that have the luxury, the time, the opportunity to engage in this kind of contemplation. Other sisters and brothers don't have it, and I don't see the opportunity more often than not to have that interaction with them. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. Well, I'm glad that you responded in that way with that clarity. One question, and let's move and talk a bit about some of the delegations you've been on in the last year. One of the things that you mentioned, which some of my experiences mirror, you talked about visiting the National Museum in a few countries and being disappointed. Expound on that, Runoko, particularly in the African continent.
Well, I'm a museum fanatic. I mean, generally, the museum is the first place I want to go when I land in another country, especially the National Museum, the archaeology museums that deal with antiquity in particular. And I think that the National Museum of Nigeria, as much as I enjoyed Nigeria, it was a disgrace. It was horrible. One of the reasons for that is because I think so many pieces have been stolen from Nigeria. The British have so many of those so-called Benin bronzes. There's a lot of beautiful pieces from the Nok civilization of ancient Nigeria in Germany, and I think in Austria. So much has been taken out of Africa. But also, it seems to me that museums in Africa today just do not have the priority that they should have. And so I was hurt when I went to the National Museum of Nigeria. Museums are so important. History is so important. And I can think of very few exceptions in Africa where museums have been outstanding. Of course, there's Egypt. They understand the importance of tourism. They generate a lot of income, and the Egyptian Museum in Cairo is one of the highlights. If you go to Tunisia, in Tunis, they have an excellent museum, or a very, very good museum, anyway, called the Bardo Museum. South Africa has some pretty good museums, and it could be because of that long period of white colonization there. But in most of the rest of Africa, museums are poorly maintained. You know, I hope I'm not making too broad a generalization. And maybe the greatest example of that, which is related to it, are the Niger manuscripts. About 4 years ago, I went to Niamey, Niger. Able to visit the what they call the Niger manuscripts. I think a lot of people have heard of the Timbuktu manuscript.
Right.
That Henry Louis Gates people have emphasized as well. But the Niger manuscripts, I think, are even more important. There are not as many of them, only about 5,000 of them. And they're written in Songhoy, they're written in Arabic. I think some of them are written in Hausa. And they deal with subjects like anthropology, history, the life of the Prophet Muhammad, sociology. And some of these books are like 700, 800 years old. And yet, I was able to hold some of them in my hands, and some of the books actually begin to crumble. These manuscripts, they are so poorly preserved to the point that I told the director and the assistant director of the institution where they were housed, don't give me any more. I don't want to touch anymore. I'm afraid they're going to be badly damaged. They're in vaults made of metal where they should be made of rubber. They've never been translated except for one or two. Most of them are poorly preserved, and they're only just beginning to catalog them. And I said, well, how does the government feel about it? So the government is not concerned. I actually paid these brothers out of my pocket, just a courtesy, to let me in the building and look at the manuscripts. And I find that's the case with many of Africa's treasures, is that they're not valued very much by the governments of those countries. And to me, they could make money off of them. You know, they could promote them as tourist items. And I think in that case, in that way, we really, really are far behind on what I think should be deserving of much more attention and recognition.
You know, I want to shift to your delegation, but you always raise another question. I enjoy speaking with you, Runoko. People listening to you and know about your travels throughout Africa, and they have an opportunity to go to a country on the African continent. Is there a primer? Is there a strategy that you use when you arrive in a country? Do you go to the museum first? Do you walk? Do you walk streets, and do you take in kind of day-to-day life? As a researcher, you've said before that you're not a quote-unquote classically trained scholar. What's a strategy for people who travel to the African continent, travel to any of the countries you travel to, and want to maximize what they get out of the visit?
Depends on the country, depends on your knowledge of that particular country, depends on whether you have people on the ground. When I say people on the ground, that means people who are going to meet you there, people who are going to steer you around, people are going to look after you, people are going to introduce you to the people that you probably need to meet. That's crucial. If you have that, you can almost always be guaranteed of a fruitful and productive trip. If you don't have it, then it's touch and go. I've been to some places. For example, a few years ago, I went to Portugal. I went to Lisbon. And about all I could really say when all is said and done is that I went to Portugal. I can put that on the list of 99. Of course, I went to the National Museum. I went to a palace, and I went to 2 or 3 other museums, too. But I found myself in Lisbon for a week. I didn't meet with any black people. I didn't have any interactions. I speak hardly no Portuguese at all. Walter, I was so disappointed, and I find that is sometimes the case. If you don't know the language, you've never been there before, you don't know anybody there, at least carefully map out the trip, depending on what you're going there for. Now, I'm always going for research. I like to relax a little bit, too, but I'm going to find evidence of black people, ancient and modern. A couple months ago, in fact, about a month ago, I did a tour for the first time of what I call the Low Countries in Europe. I went to Luxembourg. I spent 4 nights in Brussels, Belgium. I spent a week in southern Holland, in Amsterdam. Very interesting.
All right.
Because I was able to do a lot of research in advance. I found out a lot about the African presence there. Now, Africa is different, and we know Africa is very diverse. If you go to Egypt, in my opinion, don't go on your own. You go with a tour company. That way you can see the most important monuments, you have all the logistical things taken care of, and you have an African perspective. To me, Egypt, in my opinion, Egypt and Ghana are the two most important countries for African Americans to visit. In Egypt, you can see what we did, and Egypt has an excellent infrastructure, great hotels, nice roads, it's English-speaking, they're used to tourism. Ghana has the culture today, and it has those dungeons. It has Elmina, it has Cape Coast. Go in those dungeons, as painful as it is. Go in the men's dungeon. Go in the women's dungeon. In Senegal or Gorée Island, they have an infant's dungeon. And close the door if you can. And imagine what it was like for our ancestors. You're talking about a cathartic effect. Mm-hmm. It will give you a better appreciation for what your ancestors went through and what your obligations are to Africa today. And then you be with the people. I find in West Africa, they talk just like African Americans. The rhythm is similar. The music is similar. The food is, you will find yourself at home, and it will give you an anchor. It will be a kind of a glue. And I think it will take you through the most difficult experiences it will fortify you in a manner that can't be done in any other way.
Now, Runoko, this year, I know that you've been to Morocco.
Didn't go to Morocco, didn't go to Spain.
You didn't go to Morocco, you went to Spain. You went to Kemet. Did you go to Uganda this year?
I didn't go to Uganda this year. I tell you, the other big trip, of course, I went to Haiti just before the earthquake, and I'm trying to go back again.
Okay.
But the other big trip for me was in our own so-called backyard, and that was Mexico. I went with a delegation from the Nation of Islam to Mexico in April. We went to Costa Chica, flew into Mexico City, went to Acapulco. And south of Acapulco on the Pacific side is a region called, I guess it's a state, called Costa Chica. That means small coast. And there are about 200 African-Mexican communities there. And we attended what was called the Encuentro, which is a community gathering. Many of these communities were there. So I really met in large numbers African-Mexicans for the first time.
Okay.
They didn't know anything about history except that they were enslaved, and they don't even know the details of that. Except for the black untouchables of India, the Dalits, these sisters and brothers had the lowest self-esteem of any black people I've ever met. They thought of themselves as ugly and despised, and they knew nothing or next to nothing about their historical contributions to the world. So I gave a presentation, and I talked about Imhotep. I showed images of Black Christ. I showed Africans in early Spain, Africans all over the world. Some of these sisters and brothers, grown men and women older than you and I, broke down and cried. They said they didn't know anything about their history. They were hearing it for the first time. So Mexico was a wonderful experience. Mexico has millions of people of African descent, and there, I guess we could call them the invisible people. How many of us know there are substantial black communities in Mexico today? Because we certainly don't see them on TV for the most part. So that was one of the most rewarding travel experiences I've had in a long time.
That was with the Nation of Islam.
The Nation of Islam. And the head of the delegation was Mother Tanetta Muhammad, one of the wives of Elijah Muhammad. For some reason, I can't figure it out. She thinks very highly of me. She thinks I'm a great scholar. I was a VIP on the trip, and it was just wonderful. I had a fantastic time. I tell you, when you travel, you learn so much. You go to the museums, got to go to the museums. I never did really get around to that question of yours like I wanted to. But you learn so much, and I find mostly what you learn about Walter is yourself. It's as though you're looking in a mirror at yourself for the first time in a way that you never saw before. And many of those things you find very unattractive. You try not to be the ugly American. I've been to Ghana with people, African Americans, and I've heard people say things like, loud. These people smell bad. These people stink. There's a lot of poor people don't have money for deodorant, and some of these sisters and brothers say it's so loud, it's as though they want the local people to hear them. And when you hear things like that, you just kind of want to dig a hole in the ground. Many of us have the attitude that because we tend to have more than most people, we are somehow better than most people. And to me, that's a horrible, horrible attitude. And you find yourself confronting ideas and things like that you never really thought about before. And you try to rise from that. You try to be a better person. You say, I'm better than that. So, travel is an experience that I just think is so important. And I just wish more and more sisters and brothers would have that attitude. Go to Africa. Go where you can. Keep an open mind. Don't go feeling you're superior. Go to learn. Go with a degree of humility, but also you have to be assertive at the same time.
And your visit to Haiti, that was you went. That wasn't a delegation, was it, Runoko?
I went by myself. Haiti is one of those places. I always knew I was going to go to. I had to go to, but because it's so close to California, so close to the United States, I kind of put it on the back burner. So I went. I didn't stay in a hotel. I stayed in a middle-class family in a very, very poor neighborhood. Everybody that I was around was a Vodun practitioner. Walter, it was just another mind-blowing experience, my brother. I stayed there for a week, and now the house that I stayed in, the community that I stayed in, was essentially swallowed up by the earthquake. So I've been asked as a morale builder to go back again this year, maybe in October or November, and do a lecture series, such as the one I did last November, to buy my own ticket, go there just like I did this time. And that would be my contribution to earthquake relief, to try to raise morale, to try to show the greatness of Africa because we suffer. Let me say this about Haiti. One of the things that stood out to me, I did several lectures, and probably the biggest one was at the National University in Port-au-Prince, which is now, a pile of rubble. It was a good presentation. Some of the students came late, but nobody left early. And after it was over, there was a reception in my honor, which I didn't want to go to because I'm really a very shy, socially awkward person. I can get up and speak in front of thousands of people, but I'm basically a shy, reserved man. And so there was a reception for me that I reluctantly agreed to. And a couple of the students came up and they said, you're Dr. Rashidi? I have an honorary doctorate degree. And I said, yes. And they said, you're a historian? I said, yes. Can we ask you a question? Yes. And the question was, do you think it was a mistake for us to break with the French and decide to end enslavement and become a free people? Oh, Walter, it's just devastating. Because they suffered so much that they had the temerity to ask me, should we have remained slaves? Was freedom worth the price? That's how much Haiti suffered, and that's something, that statement, that question is something I'll always remember.
Runoko, how are you going to go back to Haiti in October? I thought you were going to be in Asia.
No. This recession, depression, whatever it is really taken a big hit on me. And people have not signed up for my tours as much as I would have liked.
Okay.
Southeast Asia is very expensive. China's expensive. So I'm going back to Nigeria in about in the middle of September. I'll spend some more time in Europe with my daughter, and then I come back to the United States and lecture for much of October, try to pay the bills. November, and then I'm going to also teach an online class on African civilizations. I want to mention that.
And how do we get information on that, Runoko?
I'm going to give you that information right away, and then I hope to go to Haiti and then go back to Senegal. If you're interested in the online course, which will be about 4 weeks, we'll deal with black people in Asia, Australia. It'll be visual. If you're interested in my lectures, going on my tours, etc., please contact me. The best way to do it is via the internet. My email address is Runoko, RUNOKO, @yahoo.com, or Runoko, RUNOKO, @hotmail.com. And, of course, a person could call me at area code 210-232-7272, 210-232-7272. And you can always go to my website, www.travelwithrunoko.com, www.travelwithrunoko.com. We try to update it periodically. And through those avenues, you can keep in touch with me. You can sign up for the class. You can go on a tour. You can invite me to the Bay Area or some such place for a lecture.
Okay.
And continue the dialogue.
A couple things as we wrap here. A few texts that you would steer people who know of your work, who maybe say, I don't have a lot of time to read, but I'd like to get 3 or 4 things that I could pick through and read segment by segment over the next 6 months or 8 months.
Well, you can always refer to Van Sertima's works because I'm in all of those anthologies except one, that one being Blacks in Science. That was before my time. But my biggest book is called The African Presence in Early Asia, which you mentioned earlier. It's co-edited by Dr. Van Sertima. That would be the biggest thing. Or just to go online. I have, I think, 3 books with publishers right now, but I've been so busy with travel that I haven't had the time to go back and complete the editing process. So if you're interested in my work, African Presence in Early Asia, I suppose, is the book. And then if you want a more visual overview, if you go to that www.travelwithrunoko.com website, there's a list of my educational materials, a small travel book, and also a series of DVDs and CDs that people can make use of. And I would appreciate it because I'm not getting institutional support to do this. Most of the time I'm just scraping and struggling to do these things coming out of my pocket, and I need the support.
No, I don't think, Runoko, you were on a program last year we did with, it was the Ivan program where Blanche Richardson was speaking, and she was also talking about the need to support our institutions, the need to support our resources. And it's always amazing when I get your Facebook hits and I see, well, Runoko's here. It's this debate, and you seem to be willing to take on just about anything. Runoko, you talked about reaching your 56th birthday, and you've done this. This has been the last 30 years of your life, plus. And, some days you're not sleeping because you're on the plane and you're here, the air. All your journeys haven't been easy journeys. What has this meant for you? What do you, in some degree of honesty, how do you want people to see? How do you want our community to see what Runoko has devoted his life to?
I want people, all modesty aside, to look at me one day as one of the greatest historians ever. I want people to be able to say that Runoko helped introduce us to a whole nother world of African people in places like India, the South Pacific, and Australia, that Runoko helped broaden our vision of Pan-Africanism. Those are the things that I want people to remember. Yeah, I have an ego. I want people to look at my work just like they look at Chancellor Williams' work, like they look at Jay Rogers, like they look at John Henry Clark, like they look at Ivan. I want to be a part of that pantheon. I want people to say that I gave my entire life, my entire soul, my essence, my being to trying to uplift my community. I want them to say that Runoko Rashidi loved black people, loved his people, loved the world as much as anybody that we know of. And if I can go anywhere towards establishing that impression in the minds of future generations, I would say I'd be very pleased.
And spiritually, inside Runoko, what does it mean to Runoko? That's the outside looking in at Runoko, but inside Runoko, spiritually, this journey, where does it feel in your heart, Runoko?
Oh, it's sacred, my brother. I feel very good about myself. This is what I do. I am what I do, and I do what I am. And I don't know how many people are able to say that. I say that with great pride. I wouldn't exchange places with any living person. You know, I love what I do. I feel like I'm on a sacred mission, that what I'm doing is divine. I don't intend to back up. I don't intend to slow down. I don't intend to stop. I hope to do this to the day I die. And as God is my witness, I hope that my last words on this earth, which will not be uttered for a very long time, are long live Africa.
No, we don't want them to be uttered for a long, long time, Runoko. We've been listening to the voice of Runoko Rashidi. Take a look at www.travelwithrunoko.com. You can reach him at Runoko, RUNOKO, at yahoo.com or at runoko@hotmail.com. Very prominent in the works by Ivan Van Sertima. You can get on his Facebook page, take a look at some of his follow his travels and his work. And I would encourage people that those of you who consider taking a look at Africa or the Americas, that you strongly consider trying to find a way to get your pennies together to travel with some of our scholars such as Runoko and Brother Menu MPM. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And the rewards, where your resources go and what you get back, go towards our community. Runoko, we are always blessed to have an opportunity to talk with you.
I'm always blessed to be in an interview with Walter Turner. Many blessings, my brother. Keep up the good work, and I look forward to the next installment.
My pleasure. Peace, brother.
Hotep.
Nanya corazón sin timón, nanya amor sin forza di gridare.
When they said they were bringing greatness, they were bringing horror. When they said they were bringing civilization and democracy, they were bringing domination and brutal colonization. When they said they were bringing freedom, they were bringing warehousing units and prisons. The truth is that they are bringing fascism. History is shaped by our actions. It is shaped by us choosing to fight together even when it is hard. History is ours to write. History is ours to shape. So the question is, are we going to do that? The question is, are you going to join us?
KPFA, Sounds of Resistance since 1949.
Base Command, all systems go. We are go for launch.
This is when KPFA music takes over. Raw, eclectic, real. No playlist algorithms, no corporate formatting. Just sound that moves, shifts, and surprises. Jazz bleeding into cumbia. Folk crashing into noise. The underground rising to the surface. No two nights are ever the same on KPFA. Throttle up. This night has no ceiling. Find your groove at 94.1 FM, kpfa.org.
KPFA broadcast engaged, holding steady.
This is 94.1 KPFA and 89.3 KPFB in Berkeley, 88.1 KFCF in Fresno, everywhere at kpfa.org.